Yes, people, welcome back to the YouTube. It has been a minute and I really do apologise for my absence. A lot has happened this year. It's been a really busy year. We've been travelling a lot, our vacations, staycations. My sister got married, which was probably one of the best days of my life. We've moved apartments and I stood on the balcony of our new place. We absolutely love it here. So we've been busy. So I do apologise, but we're back with the vlogs. And the last time we spoke, I think I had just competed in Dubai Pro, so I was lean, I was shredded, I was ready. But we are now moving into winter in a gaining phase, and the goal is to grow as much as possible this year. And I'm going to take you through everything that I'm doing to put on as much size as possible, everything that it takes to build muscle, nutrition, training, everything. And this is going to give you a blueprint. So if you are moving into the winter, you're going on your winter arc, trying to make as many gains as possible, then stay tuned for what's to come. So the first thing, and probably the most important thing before you even think about getting into a gaining phase, is to try and get as lean as possible. And what that will do, it will give you a really, really long runway of progress. When you are leaner, you are going to respond better, you are going to be more insulin sensitive, and you are also going to be able to assimilate nutrients much better, partition those nutrients and shuttle them into the muscles. You are going to respond much better, but equally, you are going to be very, very vulnerable to fat gain. So it's important that you slowly build your calories back out. By getting lean, you give yourself a really long runway, because that gives you a good amount of time to be able to push food, push training, and push your body weight up without gaining too much body fat. If you are already accumulating quite a bit of body fat and you start to go into a gaining phase, you're going to quickly get unresponsive, your performance is going to go to shit, and you're inevitably going to need to pull back and drop that body fat off. Otherwise, if you come to your next fat loss phase with a shitload of body fat gained, it's going to be very, very hard to get lean again. And also, you're probably going to end up losing muscle in the process, and you're going to respond much worse. So always try and get as lean as you possibly can. And you don't need to get shredded. You know, yes, I was the most lean I've ever been in my life, but you don't need to get that lean. Just get some visible abs, some good detail on the physique, then you are ready to start slowly reversing out of that diet phase. Now, this is everything that I'm currently eating, around 4,300 calories, but it's important to note that I have slowly built my calories up to this point from my diet phase. And now I was at my leanest point, we just spoke about, most vulnerable to fat gain, and that is why you have to slowly increase your calories, and you have to reverse out of that diet properly to make sure that you can stay in shape and give yourself that long runway of progress that we spoke about. When we're building up those calories, we have to make sure that they are solely driven by performance, and we have to push our food in to make sure that our performance is stepping forward. We know for a fact that if we are pushing food arbitrarily, but we are not seeing performance improvements, we are not seeing ourselves getting stronger every single week, then we are just simply not adding muscle tissue. We are probably just adding body fat and water retention and inflammation, and that's not what we're trying to achieve. We are trying to put on as much muscle mass as possible. So we need to make sure that performance is the main driver of everything that we are doing. We then have to slowly push food up over time whilst tracking your body composition, tracking your body weight, and tracking your performance. We need to make sure that body composition stays tight and we've got some good detail on the physique. We're not getting too inflamed, we're not getting too soft. And we also need to make sure that body weight isn't moving up too fast. If we rush body weight, we can be pretty sure that it's not muscle mass that we're putting on. So I think to suggest an arbitrary number just to be putting on every single week is a bit silly. I think we need to make sure that performance is the main driver and the main metric that we are tracking. And that's why it's important in a gaining phase to have different mindset around it and understand that there's different things that we need to marry ourselves to give us the indicator that we are making progress. And the main thing there is performance. So body weight doesn't need to be moving up too fast. Upward, the maximum I would think a pound per week, and that's the very, very maximum. Make sure that body composition stays in a really good place. And from there, we can be pretty sure that we are making some good progress and making gains. When we're looking at building out our diet, depending on how many meals that you want to have today, I have 6. You don't have to have 6. You can have, anywhere 4, 5, I think works really, really well for most people. But we then have to make sure that we are hitting our macros, and our macros are set up in a position to make us make progress for us and also make sure that performance is stepping forward. Protein, I always think around 1 gram per pound of body weight is enough, especially in a gaining phase where carbohydrates are going to be higher. Sometimes that might increase in a fat loss phase, but that's not what we're speaking about here. So I'm looking at, I'm 285 pounds right now. This is around 280 grams of protein, spread across all of the meals. So we're getting a good amount of protein per serving, and we're getting lots of stimulus and lots of spikes of muscle protein synthesis across the day to make sure that we're in a nice anabolic state to grow muscle. Then when we're looking at carbohydrates, we're obviously going to be looking at a lot more than that, but that needs to be driven by performance. And because glycogen, carbohydrates, they're what going to give us the most energy for performance and to make sure that we've got the energy to go into the gym and train hard and lift heavy and perform better. We then also need to consider then that those are going to be around the workout window are going to be most important. So you'll see that pre and post workout, I've got 150 grams of cream of rice or cereal with some fruit and obviously whey protein in over those. Those really, really easy to digest, fast digesting, so we can get those carbohydrates straight in and not worry about food being in the gut in our training session, and also after we can replenish our glycogen stores very, very fast. We also know by adding fruit in around the workout window, we can uptake a lot more carbohydrates than if it was just like carbohydrates from rice, for example. So we've got eggs and rice and an apple for breakfast. We've got the pre and post workout meals there where your biggest bolus of carbohydrates are going to be, and then we build the carbohydrates out from there. The next 2 meals, just chicken and rice, the Old Faithful, and then a nice meal before we go to bed, which is cream of rice again, but a little bit less because we don't need as much carbohydrates before bed. We've got a lot of fruit in there, antioxidants, we've got the blueberries and the apples, and then some fats. So fats I like to keep at the either ends of the day to obviously for digestion, for hormonal optimization, and also just to slow down the digestion of stuff as we go into bed and either ends of the day I think is a good place to have it. Keeping those at baseline, so those are only about 60 grams for me. So basically when we're looking at building out our diets, we want 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, fats at baseline to keep everything optimizing and working perfectly, and then your carbohydrates nice and high around the workout window and build them out from there. And from there, just slowly increasing your calories over time, 200 to 300 calories every time you maybe increase your calories when you are looking at building your performance. So we might see a performance stall, your body weight stalling, or even sometimes dropping, and we need to then make sure that we are stepping forward in the gym so we can add some food around that. But if you have got any more questions about how to set up your nutrition, you can drop me a message on Instagram, drop a comment below, or you can download one of the free guides that are in the description as well. But now we're going to head off to the gym, we're going to go train back, and we'll talk you through exactly what we need to be looking at to build as much muscle as possible and get the most out of our sessions in the gym as well. So once you have successfully reversed out of your fat loss phase and you've slowly started pushing your food up and you've chosen food sources that digest really, really well for you and everything's going really nicely, you obviously want to then get into a surplus to be the most efficient we possibly can be when it comes to building muscle. And I think that's something that a lot of people go wrong with. I think they never ever commit to a surplus, they never ever commit to the gaining phase, and that's why they look the same and never make any improvements every single year. And it all comes down to making sure that you actually commit to the phase at any one time. Whether it's a fat loss phase, whether it's a gain on phase, you commit and you go all in and you see it through and you stay the course. And I think this is where a massive mindset shift needs to happen. Because in a fat loss phase, it's very gratifying. You're seeing changes on the scale all the time. You're seeing the visual improve day by day, sometimes new detail coming through in the physique. It makes you feel good. You get a good dopamine hit every single day, more often than not in a fat loss phase, especially when you get leaner. But when you're in a gaining phase, it's a much slower and a much more patient process where you're going to see changes much less frequently. You're not going to see much difference in the photos and the visuals of that very often. You don't want to see the scale moving up very, very fast. Otherwise, you know that you're just going to to be accumulating body fat, as we already spoke about. So what you need to do in a gaining phase is marry yourself to different things. You need to make sure that your performance is the absolute driver of everything that you're doing. You need to fall in love with the logbook and making sure that you're progressing with your sessions from week to week. Making sure that in order to build muscle, you have to be making improvements and seeing some progressive overload. And that's why progressive overload is spoke about so much, because it is the key driver. But obviously on the way to the gym now, we're going to speak to you a little bit about that, you know, when we are training, because I think a lot of people get progressive overload completely misconstrued, and that's the reason why a lot of people don't make much progress. But that mindset shift, I think, often happens when you drop the ego. The same way in a fat loss phase, sometimes people feel a bit skinny and sometimes feel a bit small, and their ego doesn't allow them to commit to that phase because they don't want to feel skinny. We like to feel big. And also in a gaining phase, you know, there's a huge amount of pressure these days to stay lean all the time and be shredded for social media. You've got Mike Thurston walking around shredded year round. But at the end of the day, you're not Mike Thurston. You're not your favourite gym influencer who has got to the point where they're happy with the size that they have built. They've committed to gaining phases in the past, and some of them have got 20, 25 years in the game doing this shit. You know, you're probably at the start of your training and your physique development journey. And if you're watching this video, you're probably not at that point. So you have to, at some point, commit to a gaining phase, accept that, you know, there's a period of time where you are maybe going to look a little bit softer, and you have to go through a time where you're not getting much gratification from the work that you are doing for the greater good, and you've got to commit and think long term. Think the work that you do now dictates how good you look next time you do your fat loss phase, and that's sometimes 12 months down the line. And this is why winter is the perfect opportunity. That we're going into winter, you know, you're not going to be going on as many holidays, you're going to be covered up a little bit more, you don't need to be absolutely shredded in winter. And you know, well, I live in Dubai, so it's a little bit of a different story for me, but for most guys that I work with in the UK and in different countries around the world, you know, winter's a time where you're going to be more covered up. So it's a perfect time to commit to that gaining phase, fall in love with getting stronger, progressing in the gym, and making sure that you're building that physique and building that frame and that size for next year's fat loss phase. And that will dictate a hugely different look next time you get the fat loss off. So we're nearly at the gym now. We're training back and biceps, and as I'm training, I'm not going to talk you through the session too much, but I'll talk you through a little bit about what we want to be seeing when it comes to progressive overload, and what we want to get out, and some training principles that are so important, and how to make sure that you're getting the most out of your training. So I'll see you when we get there.
Okay, so I've recorded the first working set out of all the exercise that I did today to give you an idea on how I'm structuring my back and bicep sessions. But what I want to speak about here is obviously progressive overload. And the most important thing when it comes to progressive overload is understanding that progressive overload happens as a result of us building more muscle, not the other way around. So people that go into the gym and just try and add weight to the bar regardless usually end up lifting with worse form and risking injury, which is obviously not ideal. So we need to look at a hierarchy of decisions when it comes to progressive overload. And the first priority there is always the form and the execution. Standardizing your reps, making sure that they all look absolutely perfect, maintaining that throughout the set, and making sure that your form stays absolutely perfect. And if you feel like you can do better, that is the first thing that you can progress. The next thing that we try and progress is by increasing reps. So not adding load. Once we've got our form perfect, we try and get to the upper end of the rep range that we have set ourselves, making sure that we are getting to the upper end of that rep range with perfect form, and the form will only change when the rep speed involuntarily slows down as we get closer to failure. That is a perfect rep. Once you have done a set with perfect form and you get to the upper end of the rep range with perfect reps, that is when you might look to increase the load. So those three things give you a bit of a hierarchy of decisions when it comes to progressive overload. And that's how you know, and that's what dictates how to progress from week to week. So really, adding weight to the bar is the last thing that you want to do. We then want to consider training volume. And the amount of training volume is literally the amount of work or the amount of working sets that you need to do to be able to create an adaptation and enough stimulus for you to grow. And this doesn't mean that just doing more equals more gains and more muscle. That's definitely not the case. And 9 times out of 10, when people just add volume, they add a load of junk volume, it reduces the quality of the session and it doesn't build more muscle. It only generates more fatigue. So we actually want to make sure that we set a baseline level of volume, which is the minimum effective volume that you get and can still make progress and still see progressions in the gym by week. And then it's only when we might see a plateau that we might increase the amount of volume that we are doing. So that's a really important thing to understand, that volume is something that does not equal better. That's definitely not the case. And we see this all the time. People think they can just keep doing more working sets and they'll get more out of it, but usually they just end up getting less. When we are thinking about the amount of working sets that we need for any one body part, it's always going to be better to split those working sets evenly across the week rather than doing them all in one session. Because if you do them all in one session, when you get to the end of that session, you are going to be under fatigue. The quality of that work then starts to decrease, and therefore we're not going to get as much out of it. So it's always going to be better to spread them across the week. We then need to make sure that we are training within a close proximity to failure. When you are pushing close to failure, this recruits the most amount of muscle fibers and motor units, and that's what actually stimulates hypertrophy. So most of your sets should be within 1 or 2 reps to true failure. You don't need to train to absolute failure or past failure every time. 9 times out of 10, this is going to just drive too much fatigue, but we need to make sure that we are close enough so it's uncomfortable and the rep speed starts to slow down. And finally, we need to understand that muscle isn't built in the gym. It's built when you recover, so it's built outside of the gym. So you need to get in, train each muscle about twice per week, and then make sure that your sleep, your nutrition, and your recovery protocols are all on point. Resist the urge of doing more if your performance is dropping. Sometimes less is more. So we're thinking about maximizing recovery. We're thinking about 3 things: nutrition, which we've already spoke about, sleep, and stress management. And if we nail all those 3 things, we know for a fact that we're going to build muscle, we're going to be able to progress. Now, once you're back from work and you're back from your training session, we need to try and flick the switch as soon as possible from our sympathetic nervous system, which is fight or flight, high stress, then to our parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest mode. We need to be in to be able to recover from our sessions and the body restore itself. In order to do that, we need to start getting ourselves ready to go to sleep on an evening. And that starts early as possible. That starts by trying to remove caffeine as early as possible in the day. That starts by when you get home from work and the gym, you're trying to remove blue light. Light your phones, light your TVs. That's going to keep you in a high stress environment, and we need to try and remove that as early as possible and really start the wind down process so that when we go to sleep, we can have good quality REM sleep. That's the most restorative of sleep that we get, and we need to try and aim for 7 to 9 hours if possible. It's not always realistic for everyone, but we need to shoot for that good quality sleep regardless of the time we have available to us. That's when we produce the motor master hormones in our sleep, our testosterone, IGF-1, growth hormone, things that are going to help us build muscle, help us recover, and help us get into a place where we can repeatedly perform and recover and lay down new muscle tissue. We need to try and remove stress as much as possible from our lives. Keeping you in high stress, high cortisol, is going to add to inflammation. It's going to help you hold water. And we're going to get to the point where we're not able to recover from sessions because you're staying in that high stress zone. So all of these things when it comes to sleep, stress management are so important. Even things like breath work, taking time to walk outdoors, grounding, sun exposure, things like that during the day are so important to be able to switch off and wind down in the evening. It's also really important to maintain a consistent circadian rhythm, trying to make sure that you're going to bed and waking up at the same times, regardless of whether it's a weekday or a weekend. A mistake a lot of people make is trying to lay in on a weekend, and that only disrupts their cycle. Trying to make sure that your body knows exactly when it's going to bed and waking up is the best for keeping stress low and keeping you in those parasympathetic nervous states, which is optimal for recovery. Once we nail recovery, we know for a fact that we're doing everything that we need to with nutrition, sleep,
and stress management in order to make sure that the work that you've already done in the gym is actually going to pay off and it's not going to be wasted because your cortisol is high, your inflammation is high, and you're just not recovering, not progressing, and we don't want that when we're putting such much hard work in the gym. So if we can nail our nutrition, our training, and sleep and stress management, we know for a fact that we are putting ourselves in the best possible position to make as much progress as possible and build as much muscle as possible. But don't worry if you're not perfect, just try and be consistent. I'm certainly not perfect, we don't live in an ideal world, but we just try and make sure that we're doing as many of those things as we can and ticking as many boxes as we can. As you can see, I feel like I'm making good progress. I'm currently 20 kilos up from my lowest weight. Probably a little bit more than would have liked, but had lots of trips this year and we've had a good time. But I'm going to be keeping you posted with my progress along the way, and we're doing some regular updates, getting back with these vlogs weekly and seeing how much muscle I can build in the next year. So stay tuned. If you've got any questions or if there's anything else that you want to see, please drop a comment in the box or send me a message on Instagram. There's some guides in the description if you want to download those, which will give you some free advice. Subscribe to the channel, please like this video, and I'll speak to you on the next one.